In 168 AD, the most powerful man on earth sat alone inside a military tent on the frozen banks of the Danube River. He was the emperor of Rome, the commander of 30 legions, and the absolute ruler of over 60 million souls. Yet he was not drafting tactical battlefield orders, nor was he counting his vast wealth. He was writing exclusively to himself, carving a timeless truth into the pages. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. His name was Marcus Aurelius. What makes this reality almost impossible to comprehend is that no one was ever supposed to read those words. He was not performing wisdom for a public audience. He was not manufacturing a reputation, nor was he attempting to impress a historical legacy. He already possessed maximum authority in the known world. Yet in total isolation, he was writing private letters to his own soul about how to be a better man, how to hold himself to a higher standard, and how to actually deserve the massive respect that had been handed to him by birth, by title, and by empire. This reveals the sharp divide between individuals who are genuinely, permanently respected without relying on office politics or social performances, and those who are merely tolerated by the people around them. One group constantly performs their worth to the world, while the other builds it quietly, privately, and painfully in the shadows, where absolutely no one is watching. Today we are analyzing the exact blueprint of that silent power through 8 specific behaviors. These are the 8 disciplined habits that Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, and the most formidable Stoic minds in human history all pointed toward. Each behavior has been forged from 2,000 years of intense observation regarding what separates the individuals who naturally command a room from those who constantly beg for scraps of attention. If you stay until the absolute end of this video, not because of a casual request, but because the weight of what you are about to hear will refuse to let you walk away, you will understand precisely why people have been underestimating your value, how you have been allowing them to do it with your own silent permission, and exactly how to reverse the dynamic. This transformation does not require loud declarations, aggressive speeches, or a dramatic, forced reinvention of who you are. It requires 8 quiet, internal behaviors that completely rewrite the invisible curriculum you have been teaching the world without even realizing you were conducting the lesson. Pay close attention. This goes incredibly deep. Before we unpack these behaviors, we must confront a brutal reality that standard personal development content will always hide from you because it is deeply uncomfortable to face. You are not disrespected because people are inherently cruel. You are not constantly overlooked because the universe is fundamentally unfair. You are not undervalued simply because you haven't stumbled across the right group of friends yet. In the overwhelming majority of cases, you are treated exactly as you have quietly, unconsciously, and persistently trained the world to treat you. Every single time you made a minor surrender, every time you allowed a personal boundary to dissolve under social pressure, every time you laughed off a toxic insult disguised as a joke at your expense, and every time you paused and waited for permission to occupy the space you were already standing in, you were conducting a lesson. You were teaching, and they were learning. The terrifying yet entirely liberating core of Stoic philosophy, a truth lived out by Epictetus, who began life as a literal slave and died as one of the most deeply revered philosophers in Rome, is this: you cannot control the malicious actions of other people, but you are almost entirely accountable for what you have consciously shown them they can get away with. That realization is not meant to be a burden of blame. It is your ultimate source of power. If you are the one who taught them the wrong lesson, you possess the exact power required to unteach it. This shift does not happen through explosive confrontations or dramatic ultimatums. It happens through 8 quiet behaviors that undeniably and permanently rewrite the rules of your engagement. If you are ready to claim this internal sovereignty and stop being a passive observer in your own life, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. Welcome to Silent Authority. 1. You keep every single promise you make to yourself, especially the invisible ones. In ancient Sparta, there was a strict military practice that standard history textbooks completely gloss over. Before a young warrior was ever trusted to march into active battle, before he was permitted to guard his brother's flank, to hold the shields together, or to be the man another warrior willingly risked his life beside, He had to pass one solitary test that superseded all others. It was not a test of raw physical strength, speed, or tactical combat skill. He had to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that when he was completely alone and no one was watching his movements, he did exactly what he muttered he would do. The Spartans understood a profound psychological law that modern neuroscience is only now beginning to validate. The hidden commitments you keep in total privacy form the absolute structural architecture of the character you display in public. Think deeply about your own private commitments, not the grand goals you have loudly announced to your friends or posted on social media, but the promises you have quietly whispered to yourself in the dead of night. Promises like, I will wake up the moment the alarm sounds tomorrow. I will finally initiate that difficult conversation I have been actively avoiding. I will stop allowing this destructive habit to drain my life. I will finish the exact project I started. How many of those internal contracts are currently sitting broken, waiting for you to honor them? Here is the perspective that carries a sharp sting, a truth that is rarely spoken aloud. Every single time you break a promise to your own mind, your nervous system logs it. This does not happen on a vague philosophical level. It happens on a hard neurological level. Your brain's threat detection matrix, the ancient biological hardware designed to keep your ancestors alive, registers self-betrayal as direct evidence that you are fundamentally unreliable. Not unreliable to others, but unreliable to yourself. When you lack foundational self-trust, you walk into a room differently. You speak your sentences with a subtle, unconscious hesitation. You actively shrink away from necessary conflict, not because you lack the capability to handle it, but because deep within your cellular memory, you know you haven't proven to yourself that you will actually follow through when the pressure mounts. Human beings sense this lack of alignment instantly. They smell it the exact same way a predator smells fear, and they automatically adjust their respect downward. Epictetus explicitly instructed his students, first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. Notice the order of operations. He did not tell you to announce your plans to the world, vision board your desires, or endlessly journal your intentions. He commanded you to execute the action. The ancient Stoics had a precise technical term for this, prohairesis, the faculty of the disciplined will that chooses and acts, not the will that merely intends. It is the will that physically moves. Marcus Aurelius carved this exact reminder into his private journal. Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. Not tomorrow morning, not when your external conditions magically improve, and not when a wave of transient motivation finally arrives. Be one right now, in the present moment. The exact instant you begin keeping your word to yourself, especially regarding the smallest, most invisible tasks, a profound transformation occurs within your physiology. Your physical posture alters before you ever make a conscious decision to stand taller. Your voice stops trailing off into uncertainty at the end of a sentence. Your eyes stop scanning the room for an escape hatch when a difficult conversation presents itself, because your nervous system now possesses concrete, undeniable evidence of your own reliability. That evidence, accumulated over weeks, months, and years of keeping invisible promises, solidifies into the bedrock of a presence that other people cannot logically explain, but absolutely cannot ignore. You must keep your word to yourself first. Do not do it to impress an audience. Do it because the individual you are constructing, when absolutely nobody is watching, is the only individual who will actually show up when your life hangs in the balance. The world, every boardroom, every relationship, and every critical moment of reckoning reacts exclusively to the person who actually shows up. 2. You speak less than you know, and you let the silence do the heavy lifting. In the year 63 BC, the legendary orator Cicero stepped before the Roman Senate to deliver a speech that would alter the course of Latin history. Before he uttered a single syllable, he stood in absolute, unwavering silence for a full, grueling minute. The senators began shifting uncomfortably in their stone seats. The air inside the chamber grew intensely heavy. Every eye locked onto his posture. Every mind in the room leaned forward to catch what was coming. Only then did he break the stillness, projecting his voice. How long, O Catiline, Will you abuse our patience? That deliberate, weaponized silence carried vastly more authority than the brilliant words that followed it. Cicero understood a fundamental law of power that has been completely forgotten in our modern age of constant digital noise. What you choose not to say is consistently more powerful than what you rush to voice. The Stoics referred to this disciplined alignment as logos, the precise, intentional, and calculated use of language as a direct mirror of a highly ordered intellect. Epictetus taught his pupils that before they allowed a sentence to escape their lips, they must filter it through three strict inquiries. Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it useful? He demanded a surgical economy of words, completely stripped of the defensive over-explanation that actively bleeds confidence out of your communication. Look closely at what over-explanation actually telegraphs to the people around you. When you deliver a firm decision or state a boundary, and then immediately follow it with 5 detailed justifications, 2 separate apologies, and an anxious reassurance that you aren't trying to be difficult, you are no longer providing objective information. You are actively begging the room for permission. You are stating without words, I do not fully trust my own position. Please validate this choice so I can stop feeling internal panic. The individuals you are interacting with, even the ones who hold deep affection for you, register that subtle desperation instantly. They catalog it. They learn very quickly that your choices come equipped with handles, and in the arena of human dynamics, handles are meant to be grabbed and pulled. There is a powerful cultural concept known as may, the deliberate celebration of meaningful emptiness. It is the raw power of the pause, the deep authority of the incomplete sentence that confidently forces the other party to hold the psychological weight of the room. A master calligrapher never attempts to fill every single square inch of the parchment. It is the calculated empty space surrounding the brushstroke that gives the stroke its definitive beauty. Your silence is your empty space. When you calmly state, I am not available to take that on, and then immediately cease speaking, you have communicated everything required. The silence that follows that statement is not awkward or empty. It is highly authoritative. It belongs entirely to you because you have filled it with your unshakable presence rather than your internal anxiety. The very next time you decline an invitation or state a boundary, count your sentences. One single sentence is almost always entirely sufficient. 2 sentences can be generous. The exact moment you cross into a third sentence, you have begun the process of apologizing for your existence. Notice the exact internal trigger that pulls you to fill the silence. That anxious pull is the precise location of an unhealed wound of self-doubt. It is not an unchangeable character flaw. It is a psychological wound that requires treatment. The cure, however, is never more words. The cure is having the courage to trust that your presence, undefended, unexplained, and entirely complete, is more than enough. It always was. 3. You refuse to chase anything that deliberately withholds itself from you. There is a historical encounter involving Alexander the Great, the conqueror who brought the known world to its knees by the age of 32, that most conventional military accounts completely ignore. In 336 BC, at the absolute peak of his geopolitical campaign, Alexander marched his armies to the city of Corinth for one highly specific purpose: to meet Diogenes the Cynic. Diogenes was a philosopher who lived inside a discarded clay barrel, owned absolutely zero material possessions, craved nothing from society, and was widely considered the most fiercely independent mind alive. Alexander approached the philosopher with his massive army resting at his back and his elite generals flanking his armor. He stood over the seated philosopher and declared, I am Alexander the Great. Ask me for any favor or material wealth you desire, and it shall be granted to you instantly. Diogenes, merely relaxing in the warmth of the afternoon sun next to his barrel, looked up at the most powerful commander on earth and replied calmly, Stand slightly to the side, you are blocking my sunlight. Alexander the Great, a man capable of wiping cities off the map, toppling ancient thrones, and rewriting civilization, stood there in absolute stunned silence. He turned to his mocking generals and uttered a phrase that shocked them. If I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes. Look at the raw power dynamic of that moment. A man who possessed absolutely nothing, no title, no army, no wealth, and no status, commanded the total, unyielding respect of a man who owned everything. He did not achieve this by performing fake confidence or delivering an aggressive speech. He achieved it because he did not require a single thing that Alexander was offering. The Stoics constructed an entire psychological framework upon this exact foundation, known as apatheia, not apathy in our modern, defeated sense of laziness, but the radical, untouchable freedom that occurs when your emotional state can no longer be controlled by a desire for things outside your direct dominion, specifically your desire for social validation. Consider the behavior that the vast majority of people fail to recognize as active self-sabotage. Chasing. Chasing the romantic partner who suddenly goes cold. Chasing the friend who stops replying to your messages. Chasing the professional colleague who deliberately withdraws their approval. Chasing the parent whose validation never quite arrives. Every single time you choose to chase, you are conducting a highly damaging lesson. You are explicitly teaching that individual that your sense of personal value is completely portable, that they are currently holding it in their hands, and that they possess the right to weaponize its absence whenever they want to manipulate your behavior. Marcus Aurelius warned himself in his journal, "Never esteem anything as of advantage to you that will make you break your word or lose your self-respect." He did not say, "Try to avoid it." He commanded, "Never." The exact moment you consciously choose to stop chasing, a highly counterintuitive shift occurs. Initially, it will feel like absolute abandonment. It will feel as though you are giving up, being cold, or failing the relationship. But in reality, you are executing a profound redistribution of power. You are physically moving your sense of human worth out of their hands and back into your own sovereign possession. The moment you are back in full possession of yourself, you instantly cease to be an object they can manipulate with distance. You transform into a solid mountain. Stop chasing what withholds itself from you. Do not do it out of a sense of bitterness. Do it because you finally realize your worth was never meant to be stored in someone else's pocket. If you are finding immense value in these principles, take a split second to hit the like button and drop a comment below with your thoughts. It drastically helps us scale this mindset to the individuals who need it most. 4. You hold intense discomfort without flinching, and you let the world see you do it. In the year 65 AD, the great Stoic writer Seneca received a short, definitive letter from the unstable Emperor Nero. The message contained a single command: you are to take your own life immediately. Seneca, a man who had spent decades counseling emperors, writing extensively on the mastery of human fear, and constructing a philosophy built for the dark realities of life, did not panic. He did not beg for a royal pardon, nor did he fall into despair. He calmly gathered his closest friends together, shared a final meal with them, and spoke to them quietly about the enduring truths of philosophy. He embraced his wife, dictated his final letters to his scribes, and then, with absolute unwavering composure, opened his veins. As his friends broke down into violent weeping around him, Seneca looked at them calmly and asked, "Where are your maxims of philosophy? Where is that preparation so many years' study has demanded against adversity?" The point of this historical account is not to romanticize death or dramatic sacrifice. It is to highlight that Seneca's absolute calm in the face of his darkest hour was not an accidental surge of adrenaline. It was not a sudden burst of courage summoned during a crisis. It was the direct result of a specific behavior he had actively practiced in 10,000 small, invisible moments of ordinary discomfort that absolutely nobody ever witnessed. Every single time he sat with an uncomfortable truth about his own flaws instead of running from it. Every time he allowed a tense political conversation to breathe instead of rushing to soften the air. Every time he refused to fill a silence with a desperate apology or smooth over social friction with a baseline performance. He was training. When the ultimate moment of reckoning arrived at his doorstep, it was the exact same practice, just scaled up. Look at how the average person handles psychological discomfort. The exact moment tension enters a room, they move to fix it immediately and reflexively, not because fixing it is the correct strategic move, but because they are completely addicted to immediate emotional relief. The social atmosphere gets slightly heavy, and they immediately offer an apology even when they are entirely in the right. A friend goes quiet, and they instantly blast them with 3 consecutive messages to patch the silence. A difficult, glaring truth enters a conversation, and they immediately laugh it off, soften the impact, or abruptly redirect the topic. Every single time you execute that reflexive retreat, you are teaching the people around you a dangerous lesson. I cannot tolerate difficult moments. If you want to make me bend to your will, all you have to do is make the environment uncomfortable. The Stoics combat this weakness through a rigorous mental discipline known as premeditatio malorum, the deliberate daily meditation on difficult scenarios. The goal is not to become morbid or pessimistic. The goal is to become profoundly familiar with the terrain of discomfort. When you can stand your ground in a room where the psychological temperature has risen dramatically, holding your position without performing a fake sense of calm, without visibly straining to appear unbothered, but remaining genuinely, deeply, and quietly steady, the power dynamics shift completely. People immediately stop using discomfort as a weapon against you because they realize it has zero leverage over your actions. The individuals who required you to be fragile, the ones whose dominant influence depended entirely on your desperate need to smooth things over, lose their leverage permanently. You must learn to sit in discomfort. Do it because the person who has sat inside the fire 1,000 times without flinching becomes the most trustworthy, commanding individual in any room. 5. You intentionally release what has already ended before it completely hollows you out. In 212 BC, the historic city of Syracuse fell to the invading Roman armies. During the chaotic looting that followed, a lone Roman soldier burst through the doorway of a modest house near the harbor. Inside, he found an old man completely crouched over a series of intricate geometric designs drawn into the sand on his floor. The old man didn't look up at the armor, he didn't beg for his life, and he didn't panic at the sounds of slaughter outside. He simply looked at the soldier's boots and said calmly, "Do not disturb my circles." The soldier drew his sword and killed him on the spot. That man was Archimedes. In the final seconds of his earthly existence, completely surrounded by hostile forces in a city that had already been lost, he was entirely present to the work he was doing. He was not desperately clinging to what had already been destroyed. He was not frozen in the heavy grief of the ending. He was entirely here, in the immediate now, present to what remained within his control. This is the ultimate execution of what the Stoics called amor fati, the love of one's fate. It is not a passive, defeated acceptance of loss. It is an active, powerful embrace of reality as it unfolds. When a season, a relationship, or a venture has ended, it has completed its work. You are still here, which means you still have work to do. Look closely at your current life through a lens of absolute honesty. What dead structures are you still desperately maintaining out of habit? The toxic friendship that now runs entirely on mutual guilt and historical nostalgia, where both of you are exhausted performers in a relationship that stopped breathing years ago? The professional or personal role you have completely outgrown, but you continue to show up and play because walking away requires you to step into an uncharted territory? The outdated version of yourself built entirely around someone else's rigid definition of who you ought to be? Marcus Aurelius wrote directly to his own mind, "Loss is nothing else but change, and change is nature's delight." He did not write those words from a place of easy, academic detachment. He lost multiple children to disease, he lost his trusted mentors, and he spent the best years of his life trapped in brutal winter wars on the frozen frontiers of the empire. He carved those words out of hard-won clarity. What keeps you chained to a structure that has already ended is never genuine love or loyalty. It is intense fear wearing the mask of virtue. It is the suffocating fear that if you finally drop the weight, there will be nothing left to replace it. The fear that admitting something is over means it didn't matter. The fear that the people watching your life will mistake your dignified exit for a weak surrender. Releasing what has already ended with absolute silent dignity is one of the highest expressions of self-respect available to a human being. It sends an undeniable signal to the world. My time, my mental focus, and my presence are highly valuable resources. They are not infinite, and they are not freely available to anything that simply occupies space in my history. They belong exclusively where they can actively grow. When the world sees you walk away from a dead structure without making a scene, without delivering a bitter speech, and without looking back, they see someone who understands the massive difference between real loyalty and active self-destruction. End what has already ended. Do it with the quiet authority of someone who finally believes their presence belongs in a place that bears fruit. 6. You receive what is genuinely good without shrinking away from it. Epictetus was born into literal chains. He spent the first half of his life as the absolute physical property of a brutal Roman master who reportedly once twisted his leg purely to demonstrate his complete dominion over his slave's body. Epictetus looked at his master calmly as the bone began to bend and said simply, "You are going to break it." When the bone inevitably snapped, he didn't scream, he didn't curse, and he didn't drop into despair. He looked up and said, "Did I not tell you that you would break it?" There was zero theatrical rage, zero begging, and zero emotional collapse. It was the absolute, unshakable steadiness of an individual who knew exactly where his core worth lived. And it did not live in his physical leg, his social freedom, or anyone's opinion of his life. Now contrast that absolute internal alignment with what the average modern person does the moment someone hands them something genuinely good, a pure compliment, an authentic recognition of excellence, or an expression of deep admiration. Watch the immediate internal movement that occurs. What is the very first impulse? For most, it is an instantaneous, reflexive deflection. They immediately say, "Oh, it was honestly nothing. Anyone else could have done the exact same thing. I actually almost ruined the entire thing. You're just being too kind." Every single one of those standard responses is not humility. It is an active rejection. You are looking the person who gave you validation in the eye and explicitly telling them, "Your perception of reality cannot be trusted. The positive experience you just had of my competence or my character is completely mistaken." Underneath that habit, if you trace it down to the root, sits a highly destructive belief. The belief that accepting good things openly is fundamentally dangerous. The fear that agreeing with someone who recognizes your value makes you arrogant. The deep-seated anxiety that letting praise land without immediately cutting it down will make you a target. Do you know exactly where that programming originated? It was taught to you by someone in a past season of your life who desperately needed you to remain small so they could feel secure. You learned that lesson so thoroughly that you now ruthlessly enforce that smallness on yourself without them even needing to be in the room. Epictetus, the man who conquered literal slavery, never spent a single second teaching his pupils to diminish their presence. He taught the exact opposite. Know first who you are, and then adorn yourself accordingly. Know your worth, and let that knowing display itself not in loud boasts or empty arrogance, but in the grounded, silent act of receiving what is true about your excellence without flinching. The next time someone recognizes your value, look at them, accept it, and say, "Thank you. That means a lot to me." Full stop. Do not attach a hedge to it. Do not execute an immediate self-deprecating comment. Do not pivot to a smaller topic. Allow yourself to hold those 2 seconds of being seen as highly capable, worthy, and good without collapsing inward under the psychological weight of the recognition. The world will always reflect back the exact value you show it you believe you possess. Show it something formidable. 7. You respond from absolute stillness. You never react from external noise. In the year 48 BC, Julius Caesar's fleet found itself completely caught in a catastrophic storm while navigating the treacherous waters of the Adriatic Sea. The captain of his vessel became entirely paralyzed with raw fear. The crew was actively preparing to abandon the ship. Men were screaming over the deafening roar of the waves, and veterans were openly weeping. Caesar walked calmly across the pitching deck, placed a steady hand firmly onto the captain's trembling shoulder, and said, "Fear nothing. You carry Caesar and Caesar's fortune. Whether you find his historical legacy admirable or dangerous, that specific moment contains a psychological truth that transcends politics entirely. In the absolute dead center of total chaos, That man was the stillest object in the room. He did not achieve this because he failed to comprehend the mortal danger. He achieved it because he had spent a lifetime practicing the art of not being moved by things that are merely loud. This is the ultimate mastery of the mind. You respond from absolute stillness. You never allow yourself to react from external noise. A blind reaction is what occurs when your primitive nervous system has been handed total control of the wheel. It is incredibly fast, highly emotional, and completely unthinking. It satisfies the immediate psychological pressure of the moment, and it hands your absolute sovereignty over to whoever or whatever just pushed your emotional trigger. A response, on the other hand, is what occurs when you force a deliberate pause between the external stimulus and your physical action. That pause is not passivity or weakness. It is the most highly active, aggressive thing a disciplined mind can possibly execute. The Stoics called this commanding center the hegemonikon, the ruling faculty of the intellect. It is the part of your consciousness that steps back, objectively evaluates the incoming data, and chooses the optimal move rather than simply exploding in response to whatever fire the world throws at your feet. Epictetus stated it with laser precision. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Look at the hidden truth of reactivity that no one wants to state plainly. Every single time you react instantaneously to a provocation, every time you match an aggressive person's volatile energy, fire back an insult in kind, or defend yourself at full emotional volume, you are loudly communicating one thing to the room. You got to me. You successfully moved my state of mind. You possess direct power over my life. The people who desperately want to hold power over you, the difficult boss, the toxic family member, the insecure friend who constantly tests your boundaries, or the stranger online looking for an emotional war, register that validation. They learn very quickly that your button works perfectly, so they will continue to press it ruthlessly for the rest of your relationship. But when you choose to pause, when you hear a comment explicitly designed to destabilize your composure, and you simply breathe, look them in the eye, and become completely quiet, the button breaks. When you eventually respond with the measured, unruffled precision of someone who has not been moved an inch, the entire power dynamic shatters. Marcus Aurelius, while managing a Roman Senate packed with political vipers and an empire beset by endless military crises, wrote this rule to himself every morning. Begin the morning by saying to yourself, I shall meet with the meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, envious, and unsocial men today, but I cannot be harmed by any of them. Notice he did not write, I hope nobody bothers me today. He made a definitive, sovereign decision from a place of deep stillness long before the noise of the day ever arrived. Your absolute stillness is not weakness. It is the most visible, undeniable form of human strength available. The world is always going to manufacture noise. Your only job is to be the stillest thing in the room. 8. You build your character in total privacy and you let it speak for itself everywhere else. There is a final foundational reality that ties all of these habits together into an unbreakable armor. In 161 AD, Marcus Aurelius officially became the Emperor of Rome. The truth of the matter is that he did not want the position. He was a philosopher first and a ruler second, a man who genuinely believed that a life dedicated to quiet contemplation, rigorous self-examination, and private virtue was the highest path a human being could walk. Yet the empire desperately required his leadership, so he accepted the heavy burden. He served on the throne for nearly 20 grueling years, fighting brutal frontier wars he never wanted, managing complex political betrayals that exhausted his spirit, and carrying weights that completely shattered lesser men before him. Through all of that relentless public pressure, without a single night of exception, he returned to his private tent to write in his personal journal. He did not do this to draft public policy, record his military victories, or polish his image for future generations. He wrote deeply personal reminders. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. Escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane. This was the absolute commander of the Western world, and the single thing he worked on with the most intense, unyielding discipline was a version of himself that absolutely nobody would ever see. The private version. The version sitting in the military tent at midnight. The version etched into the pages of a manuscript he fully intended to be burned upon his death. That is the final habit. You build your character in total privacy, and then you never have to spend an ounce of energy announcing it, managing it, or protecting it to the public. It will naturally speak for itself the moment you step into any room. It speaks in your silence, it speaks in your boundaries, and it speaks with absolute authority when the pressure rises and the world turns its head to see what you are truly made of. What you constructed in private is exactly what you are made of. The Stoics possessed a specific word for this state of being: eudaimonia, the ultimate fullness of a human life lived in perfect alignment with your highest, most rational self. Not the shallow self that constantly performs for social approval. Not the weak self that shrinks its boundaries to avoid temporary conflict. And not the volatile self that constantly reacts, chases, deflects, and slowly evaporates under the suffocating weight of everyone else's expectations. It is the self that was built quietly, consistently, and painfully in the 1,000 invisible moments that absolutely nobody will ever congratulate you for executing. That specific version of you walks into a room differently. Not louder, not more aggressive, and not trying to perform a fake sense of confidence. You are simply present, fully, completely, and undeniably present. The exact same way a massive mountain is present. The mountain doesn't scream for attention. It doesn't execute a performance to prove its height. It is simply unmistakably there. The people around you will feel that shift before they can even process it logically. They will begin treating you with deep respect before they can explain the reason why. They will naturally lean in to hear your words rather than trying to lean over your boundaries. They will listen to your silence rather than trying to test your limits, because you are no longer an individual who teaches them they can get away with underestimating your value. Through the quiet architecture of your private discipline, you have transformed into someone they cannot afford to underestimate. 8 behaviors. None of them require you to be loud. None of them require a theatrical confrontation, and none of them demand an aggressive performance. Each one is lived out in the ordinary texture of your daily routine, in the silent promises you keep to your own mind when you are completely alone, in the concise sentences you end without offering a defensive apology, in the dead structures you calmly release before they hollow out your spirit, in the absolute stillness you choose when the world is screaming for a reaction. Marcus Aurelius never published his journal. It survived the collapse of empires over 2,000 years by absolute miracle, copied by hand, passed secretly from scholar to scholar, and nearly lost to history a dozen times. He was the most powerful man on earth, and the work he valued above all else was entirely invisible to the public eye. He understood with absolute certainty a truth that every legendary mind has discovered. Real worth is never announced to the crowd. It is demonstrated quietly, consistently, and permanently over time through the way you choose to carry your soul when absolutely nobody is rewarding you for the work, in the way you hold your ground when it would be vastly easier to fold, in the way you become day by day the individual whose internal power cannot be shaken by external noise. That formidable version of you is not a distant, unattainable fantasy. That individual is the exact version of you that is waiting on the other side of these 8 behaviors. You have been teaching the world your worth all along. The only question that carries any real weight moving forward is this: what lesson do you want them to learn? If this message reached something deep within your character, something that was waiting to be told the brutal truth rather than what your comfort zone wanted to hear, leave one solitary word in the comments below. Unbreakable. No long explanations, no detailed essays, just that single word. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, do it right now. Do not do it for us. Do it for the version of you that deserves to stop settling for a small existence and start going deeper. What is coming next will not permit you to stay the same. Walk steady. Build your fortress in absolute silence. Let the work speak for itself.